Our next guest is a proponent of the idea that Bitcoin mining can not only use clean energy, but actually accelerate the development of renewable power in the wider economy. And he's setting out to prove it. His company procures renewable energy to supply a portfolio of Bitcoin mining facilities. Joining me now is Griid Infrastructure Vice President of Strategy, Harry Sudock. Welcome, Harry.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be with you.
Yep. So first of all, let's tell our viewers what it is that Griid actually does and how that relates to making Bitcoin greener.
Yeah, so Griid Infrastructure is a large-scale industrial vertically integrated Bitcoin miner. We use our operations here in the US, and we prioritize sourcing carbon-free power wherever possible. And so what that's led to historically for us is that, we have an overwhelmingly carbon-free and renewable-focused portfolio, not because we have an ESG mandate, but because that's the way that we achieve the best results for our business.
Yeah, but we discussed this somewhat when we had you on our Money Reimagined podcast a few months back, and you talked then of how wind farms and other independent renewable energy producers were reaching out to Griid to set up mining operations, as you had put it, to produce guaranteed revenues that could essentially underwrite their development. I'm just wondering whether, what you're seeing now, because, since then we've heard about this mass migration of mining to North America after China's crackdown. What impact is that having on your operations, and is this something that is driving us toward more renewables or something else?
Yeah, so I think that if you look at the short-term game that's being played specifically by the miners that are migrating out of China, I think that they're pretty much energy source agnostic, and they're just looking for megawatts and rack space to plug their hardware into. While we're not thrilled with that reality, we think that over time, hardware migrates to the lowest cost power, and that migration is going to happen, across the fleet that's moving here now. That lowest cost power is renewable, is carbon free, and is going to be, the core of Bitcoin mining block production, certainly for the foreseeable future. From our perspective, it's just a massive opportunity. We've been prioritizing the energy relationships above basically every other business activity that we engage in. And so, because we've prioritized those energy relationships, we're going to be able to achieve, ongoing better unit economics with hardware availability, with, demand and supply being so mismatched by the Great Chinese Migration. But, for us, it's a really exciting time to be mining in the US. We love our renewable focused portfolio. We love our pipeline. And we think that if anything, it's just going to pull some growth that used to be further out. It's going to pull it a little bit nearer term for us. But I think that, the demand profile for the folks coming from China is much more energy agnostic, whereas we are focused on a longer term game, which puts carbon free forward.
Right, but we've got what it was 117 degrees Fahrenheit in British Columbia the other day, a certain, recognition that we have a global climate crisis. And you mentioned miners being sort of like source agnostic. Do you think it's enough just to, see that people are going to eventually organically move to this? As you said, renewables is supposed to be at least the lowest cost source of energy. Or do we need policymakers? Is there a place for sort of specific policy-driven incentives to actually accelerate this shift?
I think that the place to make a real impact is around energy availability and reliability. The first mission of later is to ensure as a quality of life as their constituent can achieve. And the core of achieving that incredibly high quality of life with minimized externality is making sure that the appliances run the way they're supposed to. The manufacturing jobs can be in their region because you need reliable energy to run a car plant, for instance. The burden on the legislators is to make sure that the energy grid is highly performative, highly reliable, and highly abundant, with resources that minimize impact, which means renewables, which means resources. So the view that the legislators' job is to make sure that there's high energy availability, rather than saying, Bitcoin miners aren't allowed to use energy. We're just not a big enough part of the pie where that type of specific legislation makes sense.
So, but where it perhaps could be is having policymakers, and it's really not about Bitcoin miners, it's literally energy policymakers focus on the value of a decentralized structure. The attack on the Colonial Pipeline to me was an attack on a centralized system. There was one vector of attack, and a more decentralized microgrid system is arguably more secure than one that is dependent upon these singular things. Is there any conversation going on around that? Are energy policymakers interested at all in working with you guys and others in redesigning the grid to have that insurance of supply that you were talking about?
Yeah, I wish that they were more proactive. We welcome any call from any side of any aisle in the areas that we operate for sure. I think that we're still in the education phase where it's never well understood broadly yet how energy grids function and why reliability is such a piece of the performance puzzle. So I think people are very much focused on sort of what generates the energy, and they're much less focused on what quality of life does that energy deliver. So I think when we can shift the conversation towards the latter, conversations around carbon-free abundance get a lot easier. So there's exciting work being done with fourth generation nuclear reactors. There's exciting development happening around flared gas and Bitcoin mining there. There's exciting work being done around hydroelectric power, wind and solar, to a somewhat lesser degree around reliability. But I think the conversation really needs to be around what does a thriving community and economy look like, and how do we achieve that highly aspirational vision in a impact minimized fashion.